Now we got the best going.
Sorry, we just started recording, but we haven't gotten very far, so you didn't miss much. Page 124. I love that he writes things in italics. It's like, oh, I got to remember that.
And you are answering my question about how did those people know that it was God speaking?
Yeah. How did they know that this is God speaking? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. But this is what Peter Enns writes. The God I read about in the Bible is not what God is like in some timeless abstraction, and that's that. But how God was imagined and then reimagined by ancient people of faith living in real times and places. And he
my question to that is
the what?
If we and to the whole chapter actually is if that's if this is true, and I agree with him, why is the canon closed?
And that I think is that we can imagine that all over the place, but I think the canon is closed because of control. The same power and control, the same answer to the question, to almost every single question is power and control. If the canon is closed, that means that there can no longer be that God can't speak anymore. And then we can control it, what's here.
Isn't God still speaking today?
Well, that's what Peter Enns is saying here. That's what I believe. God is still speaking today. I mean, and you have to, I think if you believe, I'm going to use that word very intentionally, if you believe in incarnation. So, Jesus is God with us, incarnation. If you believe that, you have to believe that God is still speaking. I mean, and if you believe everything about Jesus, that if you believe about Holy Spirit and wisdom there, that's part of that community. You must believe that God is still speaking, because that's just the nature, the characteristic of incarnation.
Yeah, because he says reimagining God further down the page on 125.
Mm-hmm.
Reimagining God for one's here and now is what Christians and Jews have been doing ever since there have been Christians and Jews, and invariably so, because we are people.
We are humans. That's what we do. And he then goes on. The sacred responsibility I've been talking about is really a call to follow this biblical lead by reimagining God in our time and place. And then at the very bottom, and when we reimagine God for ourselves and do so deliberately, consciously, and as an act of faith, we find ourselves once again walking in the path of wisdom, in principle no different from wondering how or whether to answer a fool, what it means to remember the Sabbath, how to treat slaves, or rewriting the story of King Manasseh. We imagine God in ways that account for and make sense of our experience. And Jane, I think that's got to be the answer to the question.
That we reimagine for the present time.
Right. And that there are some characteristics of that. And that is that we do it deliberately, consciously, as an act of faith, I would say intentionally, in community. That's all what walking the path of wisdom is about.
If you watched 60 Minutes this last Sunday, it was about the advancement of artificial intelligence, which is way beyond what we already have. And you put that to the point of God having had all these things working from the beginning of time. And we're just now being able to make things function, just like we didn't know what an automobile was, or back in the time of Jesus, because those things advanced and we keep going, but it still is always God who created all that stuff, and is just, we're allowing, or rather God is allowing us to finally materialize these things and operate with them, just like I'm talking with you in such a fashion that nobody ever heard of it back in 1,000 years ago. You know,
or
it's just
even less
fantastic.
than that.
But God had it operating all along. And the God is just fantastic.
So on
But we
page
have to be
126,
careful about our other people, that we aren't harming someone.
well, and I think that's what he's saying here on the paragraph that says, whether we are aware of it or not, behind our religious deliberations, in one form or another, we are really asking a deeply foundational question. What kind of God do I believe in, really?
Yeah. 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 Consciousness as an expression of responsible faith. Yeah. Tell me about the God
Bible
you
invites
believe.
us
Yeah.
to ask this question.
Mm-hmm.
Not
127.
that the Bible prohibits us from asking
Right.
this question,
Right.
as some would say.
Yes, the Bible calls, I think that's a really important point. The Bible calls us to ask that question. Those who say you cannot ask questions are not, I don't know, what would you say, are not biblical, are not. I don't know. Go ahead, Jane.
At the bottom of 127, these ancient languages were used to describe God in ways that made sense to the ancient writers. So Yahweh is a shepherd, a king, a warrior, a gardener, and so forth. These descriptions of God were taken from the surrounding world. God isn't actually a shepherd, for God cares for Israel the way a shepherd cares for his flock. God isn't actually a king, but God is like a king. And yeah, that's how they did it.
Yeah. Well, and let's move back up that page, because there's the humanity. So even on that most basic level of language, God is known through our human experience. In fact, the Creator must condescend to our humanity in order to be understood. As any parent will remind us, parents have to stoop down to their children's level to speak into their world. Expecting children to operate at their parents' level is bad parenting. I'm not quite sure the whole parenting model there, I'm not sure of, but the point that really resonates with me is, again, and we have reiterated this over and over and over again, God stoops into humanity. And that is the only way that we experience God.
We are so visual. We try to picture God.
Yeah.
And it's impossible. except to say, boy, what have you been doing behind the scenes all this time? And now it's first being brought to fruition for us that we can tell it. And so we have to say, God, you are just so wonderful. And the best we can put is a label of God on this activity, other than Jesus, because Jesus is the fruition of it.
Hmm.
When I was reading this, and he talks about different human iterations of God.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about how we tend to make fun of the Mormons and their beliefs.
Fun of the moment.
Mormons.
Oh,
And how could anybody believe all that silliness of finding gold tablets and blah blah blah? This is pretty silly too. I mean, if you think about it that way, I mean, not that I do believe what the Mormons believe, I don't, but
I don't know what aspect of the Mormons you're looking at that
the whole
has
thing
sayings.
about Joseph Smith seeing the angels and that
Oh,
sort of
that.
thing.
Okay.
Um, but it's all rather fantastical. So why do we believe it? What makes us believe in the us being each particular religion or sect? What makes us believe what we believe? What part of our sanctified imaginations lead us to believe those things? And it's just interesting to me.
Mhm.
I've often thought that perhaps it rises up to believe those things because of situations in our own lives that there's something missing or something could be helped if we followed that particular way, which makes me believe, or I have been impressed by other people that, oh, that's, for instance, a child is impressed by what their parents believe.
Well, and so he goes on page 128 and 129, and I think he speaks to that. Because you've heard me say that human words are inadequate in describing who God is and the experience of God. And he doesn't. What he says on page 128, he says, God alone is God. So the words and thoughts we can use can never be equated with God. When we make that false equation, we are actually limiting God. Although, and I think this is just as important to emphasize, human words and thoughts are also adequate for talking about God within each cultural moment. And no human culture is more equipped to speak of God than any other. And that most certainly includes my own Western white male tradition that has tended to think of itself as the norm for everyone else.
Boy, there you got it, Kathy.
So I mean, you talk about others, Mormons, Catholics, whatever, and there is a side by sideness, isn't there? That no human culture is more equipped to speak of God. We all speak of God in ways that experience has shaped us. And given us the language to speak of God. And he goes on, Yes, what we think God is like and how any of us talk about God may not be the final word, but they are still adequate. That's how God talk is, which he is saying again is that God is still speaking. And then for me, the really important part is on the next page. Wisdom teaches us to embrace both the adequacy and the limitations of our God talk, to keep the two in tension, perhaps accepting that paradox is true faith. The questions are the true faith. And the Bible, in all its ancient, ambiguous, diverse weirdness, models for us how invariably limited any God talk is, to make sure that we don't ever come to think that we have reached the end of the rainbow.
And that's it, isn't it? That there are so many people now, and maybe always have been, who think they have reached the end of the rainbow.
Right. And that's what closing the canon is about, isn't it? Okay, this is it. We've reached the end of what we think God can say to us. Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you study any of the other religions, the ancient ones especially, like the Romans with all their gods and what their gods could do and why they believed it, you have to believe, ultimately, I do, that the God of the Jews and of Christianity is on the same levels as those people were believing. Not to say that they were right, because they weren't, as far as I'm concerned, but they were looking at the power of the creator and all the different things too. So just like you were pointing out about the Mormons, if you go back way back in history, this has been always true.
Yeah, I had a friend who was a deacon, sadly passed away, but he preached. I met him at St. Francis House, where, people didn't really believe we were Episcopalians and maybe didn't even really believe we were Christians. But he was preaching on Pentecost, and he said, so did this really happen? And his conclusion was, we don't really know, but 2,000 years later, we're still celebrating it.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
There's something there.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Again, further down on page 129, when in this conversation about being human, the last line of this paragraph says, "We too are human, seeing God from the limitations of our own time and place in ways we probably don't even realize. And what if God is just fine with our being human?" And I think that's an astounding question. And so what if God is just fine with the Mormons? What if God is just fine with the Romans as they saw the understood cosmology? What if God is just fine with Buddhists? What?
And I think God is just fine.
Right.
And that we all come to find out the true nature of God, not in this life,
Mm-hmm. Right.
but in the next.
And what if we spend our lives keeping our eyes and our ears open for God's stooping into our existence. So that no matter what or how or where, we are aware of God's, as Jane, you put it, God's just amazing creation and creativity in our personal space, in our personal body, in our personal life, and in the life of our community and our people and our nation. We're so busy saying it's got to be my way. It's got to be the way I think it should be, that we miss so much of God's creativity in the world and in people who are so different from ourselves.
I got a big question about this, though, too. Because we have these multiple religions, but we think that people have to behave in a certain fashion, and we look at setting up the laws. The laws are what I'm looking at right now.
So what law are you looking at? Are you looking at the biblical law?
The whole set of laws throughout the world. Who is right in setting up the laws? And that comes along with who is God. God says you got to believe like this way.
You're talking secular law?
Yes.
The governments are in charge of that.
But they usually are based on religion.
Well, I don't like that they're based on religion.
Well, I don't like it either, but that's what they do.
Well, let's tell them not to.
Oh,
Well, I
okay,
think, you know, it
we're
comes
running off the point that it's because of religion that these laws have been set up in so many cases. And it gets to be nitty gritty about who should follow which way. And it's not God's law, it's human's law. But we can't seem to get across at that point. I guess maybe that's also what you were saying, Kathy.
I mean, we follow the law of the land. No one is above the law, as we have been having conversation about recently.
Yeah, it turns out not to be true, and truthfully never was. Depends on how much money and power you have.
Exactly. It comes back to power and control again.
But
then you also put it that it's God's law, and it isn't.
Sharon?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, what there are some people who are trying to say that here, that, you know, they say they're 6 people in particular say they are constitutional originalists, but really what they are is people who maybe believe in biblical inerrancy.
Mm-hmm.
From a particular...
Who are these 6 people?
The 6 people on the 6, I'm just going to say it right out, the 6 Roman Catholics on the Supreme Court. And they are very conservative Roman Catholics.
Yeah.
And
it shapes all of their decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
One claims to be Episcopalian, but he grew up Roman Catholic. So if he's an Episcopalian, he's not like any Episcopalians I know.
Episcopalian in name only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who is that?
So that
Gorsuch.
What?
Justice Gorsuch.
Oh, Gorsuch. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what this country fought for 250 years ago.
I know, and we seem to have just let that go by the wayside. And so many people seem to be just fine with that.
Yeah,
And I'm not one of them, but
yeah. Yeah, so Jane, your question, I think, is incredibly a complicated question. You know, in this country, this country has fought with words, for and had to go to other shores, to fight for democracy. That's, you know, when I think about the people who have died in battle to defend democracy, that's what animates me. That's what it's like. That's an amazing thing, an absolutely amazing thing that you would go to battle, with
And lose your own
words,
life.
with a life. I mean, in all sorts of ways for democracy. And so when you talk about the rule of law in a democracy, you're talking about people, and people are incredibly messy. They are not all of one mind. They don't, you know, so we put together this rule of law, and in a democracy, we trust that everyone will assent to that law and be held accountable within that law.
I wasn't talking just about democracy. I
Well,
was
so
thinking
what
about everywhere
happens?
there's kings
Right.
and
So
whatever.
who goes to battle? And what's the difference? So who goes to battle in an autocracy?
The autocracy is a what? A one, is that a king?
like Russia.
Kingship?
Yeah, one person, whether it's a
Oh.
king or a queen or
Okay.
a person who says, I am now in charge.
Yes. Well,
So who goes to
it's either
battle,
because
and
of
why
pressure
would,
from, because of control, again, as you put it. It's either fear or they're worshiping.
yeah, I don't know.
And I mean, I think the other thing we need to balance out against that, I personally would argue that World War II, for us anyway,
In the US.
was, yeah, was a fight for freedom and democracy.
Yeah,
But not every time we've gone to war
no,
has been that. And we have still claimed to be fighting for freedom and democracy.
yeah.
You know, when we weren't.
Yeah.
What
And
were
even
we fighting for then, are you thinking?
So
sometimes the control of oil,
Oh, control, yes. Okay.
you know, that
And-
can be a part of it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because we are humans, and humans are messy. You know, and that's
very messy.
and that's I mean, that's what I think is so compelling in this chapter, is that God comes into this. God has created humanity and comes into humanity in all of its messiness, and God is just fine with our being human and messy. But God does hold us to a standard. You and me, the three of us on that screen, and some others, that standard is loving your enemies, loving your neighbors, loving the people who are as different from you as night is from day. You know, that is what God calls us to. So
Loving fits different people different ways too.
yeah, well, because we're humans and it's messy. And that's, I mean, so laws, well, how do you make laws? You know, for me, what that translates into is laws that protect the most vulnerable. What that translates into is because, well, is human agency, right? The humanity, individual human beings being able to make decisions for themselves and live in a system that well, and be able to live within a system that, if not supports that, at least at the very least, doesn't kill you because of it or throw you in jail.
And,
Yeah.
with bread and water and live in your own poop.
Yeah.
You need a society that isn't doing that to everybody if they can't think straight, according to the controller. The autocrat, as you called it. Yeah. I still think Jesus is on top of it.
I mean, I wouldn't do it any other way. But, you know, and
Neither would
I
the
think
people who firmly believe otherwise.
yeah, but yeah, I'm not gonna, I mean, even I'm not gonna tell people who have a rich and wise faith life that is not Christian, or that does not hold Jesus as the one who is God's incarnation. Who am I to say that's not the way for them to go? Because I surely don't want them to tell me that my way is not the way for me to go.
How do we justify the missionaries then?
We can't. I have a very poor relationship with missionaries. I'm sorry. Missionaries who go to convert the savages. I think we were wrong. That's not to say we can't do it right now, but I think we were. I mean, and that sort of missionary attitude has gone on in the Diocese of South Dakota up until about 10 years ago, with groups of people coming in to do for those people who can't do for themselves.
I think it's still going on. I keep getting mail to support those kind of people.
So what needs to change in that? People still need to serve people, but they do so with the glimpse of Jesus in the eye of those they serve. You know, I approach you with the gifts God's given me, and I expect that I will have a glimpse of the sacred in you, and those two things can meet. And let's see what happens with that relationship then.
The good that I do, I hope this is how I see a missionary should be. The good that I do, I hope you will recognize that that is the way to live. And you will inquire about why I believe what I believe and look to see where Jesus is.
Right. And you do the same with the one you are encountering. You identify the good and the beauty and the sacred,
right,
in that other. And somewhere in between is where relationship happens.
like on the top of page 130, just like every other ancient people of biblical times, the Israelites believed that many gods existed and that their God was one of them.
Yep. Not the only God,
Right.
but one of the gods. And then he goes down that on the bottom of page 30. What made the Israelites different from their neighbors, religiously speaking, was their belief that only Yahweh and not any of the other gods, heavenly bodies included, was worthy of their worship. To use the technical language, the Israelites were not monotheists in the sense, I learned that this is a new word I learned, in that strict sense of the word, but monolatrists. They worshiped one God, but believed in the existence of many gods. Isn't that fascinating? I'm sure he gets a lot of flack for that one.
I'm sure he does too.
And he then goes on to say on page 131, I can understand how odd this one God among many gods idea may sound, but it's the Bible itself that drove the idea home for me. One story in particular, truly one of the stranger and more unnerving passages in all of the Old Testament. And clearly he's going to tell us all about that in the next chapter.
In the next
Yeah,
chapter. That's
it's
going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
2 Kings 3.
Okay. Yeah, so Jane, and that I think goes back to your point about the Romans. So
God, you mean?
yeah, for the Israelites, this is about who do you worship?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what our author is calling monolatrists.
With the Roman gods you're thinking about.
Well, I'm thinking, no, I mean that it wasn't their concern about who others were worshiping.
Right.
It was their concern that they worshiped as Israelites, as the Hebrew people, that they worshiped Yahweh.
Just one.
And that's always, I mean, that's true through today. Jews are not missionaries.
No proselytizing there at all.
No. But if you were born a Jew, you ought to be worshiping as a Jew.
Yeah.
And again, it was parental influence too. It's funny.
I don't think being Jewish was just parental influence. That's community.
Community influence.
Yeah.
But much of it is celebrated, for want of another word, in the home.
Yeah.
A lot of it is what, Sharon?
Celebrated in the home.
Celebrated. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. And reinforced and yeah.
Well, that's just about like any other religions that happens.
Well, no, because I mean, I just finished listening to a book called My Jewish Year, and the subtitle is 18 Holidays, One Wandering Jew. Not wandering, but wondering. And it's by a woman named Abigail Puggerman, and she set out to discover all the Jewish holidays. You know, she's always been Jewish. She was active in her synagogue, but they really only hit the high point holidays in terms of really paying attention to them. And she wanted to see what all the rest were about. So she chose 18, some very small and some very ancient, some not so ancient. It was really interesting to me because she went into the background of everything. I mean, she did a lot of research before she celebrated every holiday. And it was very interesting to see the progression of the time when different holidays came about. Just like we were talking about the Babylonian exile last week. Oh, it was fascinating to see the things that popped up then. And she said that out of the 18, there are, like only a couple that don't have food involved with them, where, there's certain things you're supposed to eat, and you do that as a family at home. So that's why I said that,
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Did she involve her family in all of that?
She invited them to be involved in all of that. At the time, she had 2 teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
and they sometimes they came with her and sometimes not. It turns out, and I didn't know this, that there were 6 fasts, not just one. And for the most part, her family chose not to participate in the fasts with her.
Imagine not. Yeah.
Well,
That's
we just
that's
had 10
fascinating.
bells.
That's fascinating.
Yes, we are. Okay. So the next chapter for next week?
I think so. I hope people skip over that chapter because again, I thought this was
Yeah.
actually a
I
foundation
thought it was really important. Yeah.
chapter in what he has to say. Yeah. Imagining and reimagining God. So what are you saying? For 2 Kings 3.
Yeah, that's as far as I got. I
Okay.
only read that first page. So,
Okay.
and it's a very short chapter.
Okay. Well, that's okay. Next, so I'm doing, I'm going to the women's mini week camp.
Oh, yeah. So what week are you going to be gone?
Well,
Or-
it's not on a Friday. It's
Right.
not over a Friday, but what I'll next Friday is probably my day to really finish everything up and put everything together so I haven't quite decided when I'm leaving to get there and where I'm going first. It's as far to drive to Janesville. It's actually farther to drive to Janesville and stay than it is to just go straight to the camp.
Where's the camp?
Watoma.
Oh, okay.
So I might take an extra day and stop and enjoy myself in
In
somewhere.
Janesville?
No, somewhere in the beauty off of I-94.
Oh,
So we'll see what I decide to do.
I went to see my doctor and my regular one, which was required, and he has approved that I will have my left shoulder a total shoulder replacement Monday, August the 12th.
Oh,
Total
Okay.
shoulder replacement, not just rotator cuff surgery, but
Correct. It's total. And it's going to be reverse, where the ball goes up in the shoulder and the cup goes down into the arm.
I don't understand.
They find that works better.
So our
So-
bodies weren't created right?
Huh?
Our bodies weren't created correctly?
I guess so.
how
Okay.
long did it be in the hospital?
They did tell me it would be one overnight for sure. So at least that's what I'm expecting.
So what did you say? The 12th, Monday the 12th?
Correct.
Okay.
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 So
And-
prayers, please. that it all turns out
Absolutely.
right. And the torture chamber after that, called PT, isn't too bad.
Yeah, yeah. And if you would all keep it in your prayers, a friend of mine, her name's Renee Hansen, and she has many medical problems, but sort of brittle bones. And she fell and fractured two vertebrae.
Ugh.
Ooh.
And so when we get off, I'm going to go make some food and take it over to her. She'll be in a back brace for at least 3 months.
Ugh,
And
tough.
she makes her living tutoring and making quilts and other kinds of knitted and crocheted things that she sells. She's not going to be able to do that for a while.
Oh, okay.
So,
Renee Hansen.
Mhm.
Okay. Okie dokie.
you all take care.
Stay
And I
Too.
will
God bless
see
all of
you.
you, and hope to see you next
Okay.
week.
next week.
Yes,
Stay
when
well.
we'll pray real heavily.
What
Yeah.
was that?
I said we'll pray really heavily next week for you.
Okay.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.